Welcome back. We're talking about the G20 summit that recently concluded in Hamburg, Germany. Still with us, Qinduo Xu is a political analyst for China Radio International. Matteo Garavoglia is a non-resident fellow at the Brookings Institution. Alexander Nekrassov is a former advisor to the Russian government. And John Sitilides is a global risk analyst and U.S. government affairs consultant. Let's get back to our panel right now. Alexander, let me start with you. And you talked a moment ago about Syria, about Russia's role in Syria. Russia, of course, is deeply involved in Syria. President Putin and President Trump did discuss Syria during their meeting. Let's take a listen to what President Putin had to say. Let's watch.
As for Syria, yes, we've discussed this issue. Whether the United States' position has changed or not, it seems to me it has become more pragmatic. Overall, it looks like it didn't change, but there is an understanding that we can achieve a lot by uniting our efforts. And the result is the agreement on the southern de-escalation zone. No matter who reacts to it, I can tell you it is one of several breakthroughs we've managed to achieve during joint work with President Trump.
So, Alexander, President Putin, they're sounding relatively upbeat about the outlook in Syria. Are we going to see more agreement, more consensus on how this problem is resolved?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not optimistic at all. And I think that the escalation zone sounds very nice. But unfortunately, there are groups on the ground which don't care about those escalation zones and they continue fighting the way they did. Unfortunately, Syria will continue to be a big problem, and for Russia as well, because Russia, let's face it, has troops there. Not a lot, but they are there, and the numbers might grow. I don't see any cooperation from the Americans at all. They change their position daily. They say one thing one day, then another thing another day, which is a reflection of how Trump operates. So either he's trying to confuse everyone, or he's playing some sort of a game that he is used to play when he was negotiating his deals as a developer. I don't see any progress at all. I think the situation can explode at any moment there. So, of course, President Putin was, basically putting a brave face on the situation and trying to push Trump to this solution. I don't see anything happening.
You know, Alexander, there's a term we often hear here in the United States about U.S. military involvement around the world, and that term is quagmire, when the military gets bogged down in a certain part of the world. Is that what we're seeing as far as Russia is concerned in Syria? Is Russia now in a quagmire?
Well, I think the Americans, if you will be honest about it, they want Russia to be sucked into this conflict and send more troops there. I think that is the whole point of Trump administration policy. And I don't understand why people don't see what is going on. And I must say that, unfortunately, generally, I agree with the point that, the G20 summits, they're practically Potemkin villages. It's only this year that Trump's interference started to change things. Because generally, we have a communique, everybody says wonderful things, pats each other on the back, and so on. In reality, there are problems around the world. There are conflict areas which need sorting out immediately. The economy, the world economy, is in a state when if nothing is done in the next year or two, it will collapse. And, nobody is saying anything. We won't want free trade. We want this and that. I'm amazed that, they haven't woken up to the reality. And I hope, if President Trump is still at his job, that the next G20 is going to be much more practical, much more honest, much more open, and they will stop doing this, farcical, theatrical, some sort of a performance when they adopt resolutions which everyone forgets the next day, and nothing specific is being offered. No brave initiatives. I don't remember a single brave initiative, by the way, in all of G20 summits. So let's hope for the best for next year.
Okay. Qinduo, the Chinese President Xi Jinping, he also met with President Trump in Hamburg. President Xi emphasized the importance of this alliance. Let's take a listen to what the Chinese leader had to say.
Both China and the United States keep in close communication regarding international and regional issues. Of course, we also see the sensitive issues remaining in the China-U.S. relations. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. Currently, the world situation and differences continue to emerge. Strengthening the cooperation between China and the U.S. benefits world peace and prosperity, and it is also in the interest of Chinese, Americans, and people around the world.
So, Qinduo, how is this alliance between China and the United States evolving now under President Trump?
Well, like many people describe the stability, the period right after the Mar-a-Lago meeting in April as honeymoon. I personally don't agree with that. I think that's simply a stable period after Donald Trump assumed the presidency in the United States. And from the Chinese side, for China is seeking a stable and strong relationship with the United States because China views that as beneficial to Chinese development. But Donald Trump is a different president. He tends to be transactional, even while they are working on North Korean issue. Basically, if he sees no quick results, he tends to withdraw from that cooperation, or he tends to see, probably we need to do more to punish the Chinese on economic issue, on trade issues, say things like that. But I think largely on the Chinese side, they will continue to work with the U.S. If you look at the second meeting actually between the two men, Donald Trump calls Xi Jinping a friend. And in the group meeting, he put his hands, basically both hands, on the shoulder of Xi Jinping. So still, their meeting is also very cordial. While at the same time, you can say it's frank, especially on the North Korean issue. They do, both sides agreed to continue to cooperate on that issue. So, and the issue itself, it takes time to produce results.
Matteo, President Xi also met with Chancellor Merkel. How important is this relationship between China and Germany, coming at a time when Chancellor Merkel is charting a new course, not just for Germany, but for the European Union as well?
I would say that is extremely important. First of all, I think I would disagree at looking at the relationship between China and the United States as an alliance. If anything, I think it's a rivalry. And I think we have to step beyond what Donald Trump says today and what Xi Jinping might say tomorrow. What we have is an historical trend whereby China is an emerging power, and this, the coming up of China on the global stage will have to be managed skillfully. And at the same time, the United States is a declining power in historical terms, and that decline will have to be managed skillfully as well. So we have an historical trend there, two historical trends that we have to manage. Within that context, Germany has been, and Chancellor Merkel has been cultivating the relationship with Beijing more and more over the last few months, because I think there's a realization in Germany and all over Europe that on at least in a number of policy areas, Europeans will have to look for other partners to work with beyond the United States, because the relationship between Europe and the United States, which traditionally was one based on values, is becoming more and more a transactional one. So in that respect, I think the Europeans, and Germany, first of all, as the most important member state of the European Union, will see how, will try to play a mediating role between China and the United States on one hand, and at the same time they will try to exploit certain divergences that might exist between China and the United States, so as to enhance Europe's profile in a trilateral global relationship, so to speak.
Okay, Qinduo, I'm going to give you a chance to respond very quickly to what you just heard there.
I tend to agree with that. I think, for China and Europe and China and Germany, they do see in each other a partner, increasing important role in the partnership, mostly because of the change in the United States. I mean, looking inward and also basically giving up on globalization.
Alexander, one other issue. Chinese President Xi also met with President Putin in Moscow before this summit. How do you see this alliance between Beijing and Moscow evolving?
Well, I think that a lot of leaders in Hamburg wanted probably to know what the two leaders were talking about in Moscow. I hear that there is an initiative from Russia and China on North Korea. Initially, they are suggesting that America and South Korea stop their war games, or at least scale them down dramatically, because both countries feel that this is something that provokes Pyongyang and the regime there. I think it can go further, and it was discussed between Russian officials and the Chinese officials. The problem with North Korea is that South Korea basically has the guarantee of the United States for its security. The troops are there, you know, the weapons are there, and so on. And North Korea is open to blackmail and open to pressure. I think that China and Russia can become, on the request of the United Nations Security Council, to become guarantors of its security. Then we can talk about scaling down its nuclear program and many other things. I think this was floated in Moscow, you know, between officials. I don't know how it's going to be presented, but I think this is a way out. And I think China and Russia can pull it off.
John, very quickly, there has been deep concern in Europe over the United States' commitment to European security. President Trump was in Poland. That was an official visit there. He assured European allies that America is committed to their security through NATO. Do you think he's put to rest those concerns that the Europeans had?
I believe he largely has. I mean, I think a lot of the debate there was symbolic. He didn't use the right terminology when he was first in Europe several weeks ago to the satisfaction of many European leaders. I think it's also very important that he chose Poland to give this speech. One, about NATO and Article 5, so that self-defense and mutual defense is sacrosanct inside the alliance, but also in terms of a country that is on the front line, not necessarily bordering Russia anymore, but in terms of Eastern Europe and the concerns that those countries have. Poland, the newer countries in the European Union and NATO in the Balkans, and also the Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. They remain very much concerned about Russian aggressive activities in Europe. And I think that Donald Trump going there to talk about Russian aggression and the need for Russia to scale back was very important, as opposed to doing it from Belgium or Portugal.
And that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us.